AppSync is a GraphQL API in a sense that is able to pretty much communicate back and forth with our backend, which is going to be our DynamoDB table for today. And then our second part is going to be set up by Dennis here, which is using analytics. Want to talk a little more about that?
Yeah, we'll set up analytics through the CLI of Amplify, and that'll enable analytics collecting by default by session data and demographics, just to set up the stage, and then we'll kind of talk about what we can add to that, like custom attributes and such, just to get you going.
And then what is SwiftUI?
Yeah, so SwiftUI is something that was introduced at WWDC this year by Apple. That's their big developer conference, by the way. And that is kind of a new way of kind of programming your views. Your typical programming your views beforehand was using UI views and moving that forward and kind of just very object-oriented. This is kind of a new way of working with views in a sense that you have more of a stateful view in a sense, sort of like when you were using React or Java, like those JavaScript frameworks. You had to have the stateful view of things either show up or do not show up.
Awesome. So we're going to build this with AppSync, DynamoDB, and Amplify. And we talked a little bit about what each of those things were. So why don't we just dive into the code?
Yeah, for sure.
Let's take a look. Okay, so here we go. All you.
Perfect. So as you guys can see, hopefully on my console, I'll have my terminal open right now.
You want to make that a lot bigger.
Yeah, 1 second. Can everyone see that?
Getting better. Yes. Now it's good.
All right, cool. So first step we're going to do is we're going to have to configure our Amplify project. This is kind of how we're going to be orchestrating all of our backend for us actually configuring our project itself. So we're going to run Amplify init. So this is assuming that you have the Amplify CLI installed. If you do not, in that GitHub link that we're going to be sending out, it talks about how to actually install the CLI itself. Once that is actually installed, you'll be presented with a prompt something like this. I think Ed's sending that out right now. Cool. All right, so for a name for our project, we're just going to use the default project right here, which is called Twitch Conferences, but you can really define any project name you would like as far as that, whatever you would like. Once that's all done, you will want to define an environment name that you would like. So for this environment, we're just going to be using dev as that is kind of what we're building. We're kind of doing this live. We're going to call it dev. Choose your default editor. We're going to be using Visual Studio Code for this one on my computer as this one configured. Since we are doing an iOS app, we're going to choose an iOS app. And then it will configure a few backend things for your AWS profile. Since I already have a profile configured, I'm just going to choose my default profile. What it's doing in the backend right now is it's going to be spinning up an S3 bucket to actually put our CloudFormation templates into that will then be able to be used to deploy out our AppSync backend as well as our backend for DynamoDB and later on our analytics. So that takes about 1 or 2 minutes to actually get everything configured and everything else like that. So in the meantime, on the repo, also make sure that you configure, do pod install, so that way you actually have all your pods already installed, as we are going to be doing that a little later on. So now that this is done, we'll now have a project configured, and you can double check that it is configured by running Amplify status. It should just return back an empty status page, which will say that you have no categories, no resources configured, and you are able to then move on.
So the beauty of using Amplify in this case for auth is that I don't have to know Cognito super well.
Yeah, you don't need to know Cognito. You don't need to know any sort of like anything really about AWS in general. All you need to know is that you want to add an API, or you want to add auth, you want to add analytics. So we actually check out all the different types of plugins that are currently supported out there by just typing the command Amplify. So when that runs, you actually can scroll up a little bit to our categories up here and actually take a look at all the different categories that are provided. So we have analytics, APIs, auths, you run Amplify functions, hosting, interactions, notifications, storage, and so on and so forth.
And the categories could be a mix of different AWS services, could be one or more of them.
Exactly, yeah. So like the API we're going to be creating today is going to be using both DynamoDB and GraphQL, but only have to configure the GraphQL section of it.
Awesome.
Yeah. So now we're going to go ahead and do that. So we're going to run Amplify add API. It'll ask you if you want to create a GraphQL or REST endpoint. We're going to be creating a GraphQL endpoint for this demo. Once again, you'll provide an API name. We're going to go with a default. And it'll ask you if you want what type of authorization we're going to be doing. Since we're going to do a kind of a dev environment, we're just going to use API key. Do we have an annotated schema? We're going to go with no, just so we can show you guys what it kind of looks like to go through a guided schema creation. So we're going to go ahead and choose a single object with many fields, or with many fields. So this will create a default to-dos like app. Do you want to add the schema? Yes, because we're making a conference app. We're not making a to-do app today. So we're going to go ahead and open that up. And so what it's going to look like is you're going to see a GraphQL model kind of pop up. And so you can see that you have an ID, you have a name and description. So that's a good start for our conference app. But I think there's a few more things we want to add. Like,
Totally.
for example, you want to have a speaker added in there. So you want to add a speaker name per se. And that will be, you have to have a speaker for every conference. But
Totally.
description, sometimes you don't need a description for it, but you need a name for a title.
Description might be renamed to like abstract of the talk.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. We can call it abstract instead. But sometimes conference apps don't have an abstract. Sometimes it's still being worked on. So you don't want to require. And so what the exclamation point says is that this is a required field.
Got it.
So we can have an abstract, but we don't need one. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have a speaker bio as well, because it's important to know everything about your speaker. But once again, the speaker might not want to provide a bio, and so you just want to make that as an option as well. So we're going to go ahead and save that schema. Once that's saved, you don't have to do anything else with that, and we actually can go back to the terminal itself. And we'll hit enter to continue. And what it does is it will compile the schema to make sure that it is a valid GraphQL schema, and then we're ready to run Amplify push. So when we run Amplify push, it's going to ask you a few more questions about what app are you building, and also, are you sure you want to continue, and finally about some of the code gen features that are added for AppSync. So it'll ask you if you want to generate code. We're going to go ahead and say yes, because this saves a lot of time when you're trying to build your first GraphQL app. We're going to go with the defaults here for the most part, and then we're going to choose 2 for our maximum statement depth. For file name, we're going to keep that as default as well for api.swift, so that way you guys can follow along a little easier, but definitely you can keep it all together. Now, once this is done, this will take about 1 or 2 minutes to push this all to the cloud using CloudFormation. So at this time, love to take any sort of questions that anyone might have about Amplify, and we'll hop back into the actual Xcode and actually start developing some things.
Awesome. So once this is set up, we're just going to jump into the code.
Yep, we're going to jump into the code itself.
And we need to, I'm assuming, install something to integrate Amplify?
Yeah. So to install, we're just going to open a new tab here while that's running. You'll see that when you open your clone this repo, you'll have a pod file right here. What you'll want to run is pod install. What this will do is it will set up all the extra things you'll be needing for later on today, which includes the SDKs that are needed to actually communicate back and forth to AppSync.
So all you did prior to the stream, just to clarify for everybody watching, is you created an Xcode project, you set up a pod file, and then which automatically creates a Xcode workspace.
Yep.
You installed those Cocoa pods by running pod install, and then you just set up Amplify on screen for us.
Yep. Yeah, so the only thing I've done that's different from the repo is actually running pod install. It just takes a little bit of extra time, and we decided to kind of remove that from the actual stream just because it takes a little bit of time sometimes to do a full repo refresh. Cool. So while that's loading, we're going to go ahead and go into our Xcode project and take a look at what we have here. So hopefully you all can see that. What we have on the left-hand side, I don't know if I can zoom in on the left-hand side at all. Don't think I can zoom in any on the left-hand side. But what we have on the left-hand side is we'll have 2 folders that we're really going to be working a lot in, and then the app delegate itself, which, if you're familiar with iOS apps, is a very important part about your iOS app. It kind of contains all the extra information and initial setup of an app. So the back end is going to be the file that's going to be
You want to make that a little bigger.
communicating back and forth with the app. You can't make that left-hand side any bigger.
No, the code.
Oh, the code? Yeah, for sure. So we'll take a look at those real quick. They're just empty file classes that we'll be filling in later today. Then we have our app delegate. This will be, we'll be working mainly in the did finish launching with options, and this is where we're going to be initializing the AppSync client. And then finally, we're actually going to be building out our SwiftUI views actually in here using SwiftUI. So let's check in on our thing, and it looks like we finally got a GraphQL endpoint and API key. So now that we have this available for us, now we can actually go ahead and deploy or like add our Swift API file and our JSON file to our Xcode project. So now we can communicate back and forth with our GraphQL endpoint. So we're going to hop back in. First thing we're going to do is going to configure our app delegate to actually be able to communicate back and forth with that AppSync endpoint. So first we're going to run import AWS AppSync. This is be able to be imported from that pod file that we installed earlier, so that way we don't have any issues there. Next, we're going to want to create a public var. So what this public var is going to be is going to be our AppSync client. And what this is we're going to be referencing this across the entire app. So there's going to be one or two files that we're going to be creating today that's going to be needing this AppSync client. So we're going to have to configure it and then be able to use it.
Got it.
Yeah. So now we're gonna copy some code in here. So what this will be is what this piece of code I just pasted in there is going to be AppSync configuration. So what it does is it will actually pull in the configuration from our JSON file that we're going to add here.
Wow, that was nice.
Yeah. So you'll notice that there's a few errors here. It looks like command sign view. Yes. Sorry about that. There we go. That should be good. Yes.
Oh yeah, I wondered why you did an exclamation mark. I was like, what?
No, there we go. We're good.
I haven't seen that one before.
There we go.
Unless I want to like use an optional.
Yep. So what we're saying with the exclamation point versus the question mark is this is not an optional. This is required. So
Got it.
if we were not to have an AppSync client, then we should fail, in a sense. That's what it's saying.
Okay. Fail at even like launching the app, essentially.
Fail launching the app, exactly. Which means that there's other issues beyond than just having something. We'll print an error, but then we'll fail, in a sense. This is the way we fail. And so print says that if we have no communication at all, which is bad, you shouldn't even ship that code. It'll crash, in a sense. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add some files that were generated by our AppSync code gen, in a sense, for Amplify. So what you'll see is when you run your code gen, you should be able to, in your directory, you should have an AWS configurations file, and you should have API.swift file. Go ahead and click on both of those, and you'll want to click Add. Make sure that this button right here, Destination, Copy Items if needed, is selected. Sometimes people run Amplify add code gen in the wrong location. What this does is it just makes sure that it pastes the files in the right location, so that way our app is able to see them. This is just the double check.
That's
make
cool.
Sure that you're good.
It's an extra security in case you ran Amplify in the wrong file.
Yep, exactly.
So the AWS configuration file was created by the CLI. It'll have our endpoints. Can you select on that real quick?
Yeah, for sure.
So it'll have the endpoints and say, because we've configured AppSync, it'll have the endpoint, the region, and the key in there. And then the API Swift file was generated from the GraphQL endpoint. So we created this GraphQL schema, and then it generated this nice Swift code for us that we just placed, and then used that as calling those commands.
Yeah.
Let's see that Swift file.
Yeah, so the Swift file, you can see that all of our different things. We see create to do input. We have our GraphQL map convertibles. And what you see is you have our name, our speaker bio, and abstract, and all that is all available here. And one thing you'll notice is, oh crap, I made a mistake. It should say, instead of create to do, it should have been create talk, for example.
Yeah.
How do I make that change? Well, that's a great question, because I would really like to say it's called talk, not to do. So what we can do is we can go back to our schema.graphql that we were modifying earlier. We just can change this from type to do to type talk. So what we're going to do is then we're going to go back to our thing. We can just run amplify push again, and then what it will do is it's going to re-update everything. and then while that's happening, we can just go ahead and move forward. But it's just an easy way to show you that as you make changes, or you say, for example, you want to add an extra field or add another model, you can easily do so by just literally choosing the same, like just editing that schema file.
And those auto-generated files will update automatically?
Yes. Those are automatically generated and will update automatically, so that's why it's very key to take heed to this thing at the very, very top that says this file is automatically generated and should not be edited. This is very important, as if anyone adds any custom things in here, it could be deleted when someone runs Amplify push again.
Got it.
So now while that's running, this will all be updated here soon. We're going to kind of dive into our talk store. So what we have with SwiftUI, we introduced some new types of classes. The first class that we're kind of working with throughout this entire thing is called a bindable object. What a bindable object is it pretty much tells SwiftUI to update. And for those that are familiar with React, it's sort of like props in a sense. It's whenever the props is changed, things will get re-rendered in a sense. So what we have to do is we have to create a props in a sense that is able to then re-render the view and then is able to then display the new data in a sense. So what we have to do is first in our talk store, we have to call it a bindable object. And then with bindable object, so there was a change from beta 3 to beta 4. I'll be running on beta 3, but anyone that's following along with beta 4, the only difference between my code that I'm going to be showing today and your code is that Apple has changed it from did update to will update or something like that, will change. So just you'll have to change the word did to will. Since we are still working in beta, Apple's going to be making all sorts of different changes. So we'll try and support both beta 3 and beta 4, but just for those following along in beta 4, there is a difference between the two. All right, cool. So first thing we're going to add in here is our did change here. So what this does is it adds our, like pretty much what is needed for bindable class. So the first thing we do is we add a pass-through subject. So whenever something changes in this class, we want to pass through the object that has changed. So you can choose to either pass through the entire final class like I did, or you can choose to pass along something inside the class itself. So if, say for example, you want to just pass back the list, instead of passing back other information in the store beyond just the list, you can just define the list as the pass-through subject. But you only can have one pass-through subject per bindable object.
And this is all SwiftUI stuff?
Yeah, so this is brand new to SwiftUI, yeah. So
what if you wanted to pass back like a specific key of the class or property?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So instead of placing it here, I would then say, for example, I wanted to pass back just the list of talks. So that's just that one property, that class in a sense. I would then change it to the type that is associated with that. So I would just replace that right there.
Got it.
And that's how I pass back just that single list, that property in a sense.
But instead you're passing back the whole object.
The reason why I'm passing back the entire object is eventually, as you grow the store and everything else like that, say for example, you want to be able to use this for querying for a single detail of that list, for example. You want to be able to say that a single object has updated, and you want to pass through that single object, say for example, that edited object. So you want to be able to pass through that single object, and that's one way of doing it is by having that entire class available. So now that we have this available, what we did was we pretty much say, whenever we do set something, we will then send the notification that it did change to ourselves. And that self thing sends that pass-through subject, and we are rocking and rolling. So now we have to configure our init. So our init is kind of the way we're going to be doing the configuration of both our AppSync client as well as our list. We obviously have to populate the list with information. Because if it's an empty list, it's no use to us. So what we're going to do is we're going to paste in some code here. We'll walk through it. What we have here is we're first going to initialize it to nothing. This way, if anything references it, that way it at least has something. Definitely when we're working with AppSync. Because what AppSync is still a network call. So you have to make the initial call. What's nice about AppSync, though, is it has offline capabilities. You want to talk a little bit more about offline?
So it has the option of several things. You can actually query locally, get the data locally, or you can say, I want to query locally and then go to the network and make those calls and bring them back in there. So let's say you're trying to query something or make some changes, it can actually access locally to your application when you're on the train or you're offline, and then automatically sync with the server when you're back online. And it'll take care of all that for you. So
That's awesome.
And then you can decide as a developer how you want to manage those syncs.
Exactly, yeah. So what you'll see here is we set up a cache policy here. So what we do is we actually say that we want to first return the cache data. It's the fastest possible data to return, because it literally is on your device. And then what it does is after that, it will then go to the server and fetch new data. So what it does is then it will go get the new data, and then it will update again. So it does one pass through and then another pass through after the data is available. So what we're doing is we're storing the cache data immediately as possible in the self list talks, and then we'll be re-updating it again once we're ready to rock and roll.
Cool.
So now that we have our init done,
That usually takes a lot more code to build it like that, so
yeah, exactly.
it's a really awesome solution.
Yeah. And then we're just going to be adding another init here for later on for SwiftUI. It's a unique ability to show the view growing and be able to manipulate it, but it won't be needed for the production app. So we're just going to add that in right now. So that's going to be easy. So what this does, is all it does is says that our AppSync clients can be nil and our current details nil, and then our list talks will just be available. I don't think I actually need current detail in this version. But what this will say is that we're just going to be importing a talks as an array, and then we're actually going to be working with it throughout the manipulation of.
Do you have like custom things saved in IntelliSense? Is that how you're pulling up?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in Xcode, there's something called code snippets. So in code snippets, you can just type key letters, and then it will automatically put the code in there. And all the snippets that I'll be typing in throughout the entire thing is all available in the GitHub with explanations right next to them as well.
Cool.
Yeah, makes it a lot easier for live coding as well as manipulating things. So this is kind of our talk store that we're going to be getting started with. We're obviously going to be editing this and manipulating this more as we need to add new functionality. Say, for example, we can add in delete later on and so on and so forth.
So there's no views in this yet. There's just sort of getting the core piece set up for the talks.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So something that they introduced on the right-hand side over here is something called editor, editor only in Canvas, and then editor and assistant. When you notice we open a view, it will actually show an editor and a canvas. But what happens is if you open it for our bindable object here, you'll actually see that it says it cannot preview this file. Well, that's because there's no view. You can't do anything about that.
And for those in Mojave that don't have Catalina, you wouldn't have that dynamic view anyway, so you wouldn't see that.
Exactly, yeah. So now that we have our store, so this is how we're communicating back and forth the AppSync, we actually now have to create the view itself. So to create the view, we're going to be diving into this content view in a sense. Well, this content view is going to be our list view in a sense. So what we're going to have in here is if you were to open our editor and our canvas, and we're going to hit resume up here, we're actually going to load that up real quick. And what you're going to see on the right-hand side when it pops up is you're going to see something that looks very similar to a simulator, but it's not. Well, I'll show you why it's not a simulator in a few seconds as it loads.
And this feature on the right is new with SwiftUI as well?
Yes, yeah.
I mean, I definitely code in Swift pretty much every weekend, and I have not played with SwiftUI yet, so everything you're showing me looks brand new to me, but it's very, very cool.
Yeah. So what you see all of a sudden when it pops up on the right is you'll see a Hello World app. Literally, it's just very, very basic. But what
with like a
happens-
label.
With a label.
Oh, a
Right.
text view.
Yeah, text view in a sense. But what I can do is I can now change it to say, hello Twitch. And what you see on the right-hand side as I do that is it'll automatically populate it and it'll automatically change it very dynamically. So what this makes it really cool is I can customize my views while seeing what happens on the right-hand side without having to recompile the entire app every time.
That's amazing.
It's kind of what React Native had for hot reloading
Yeah,
for a while.
Yeah, for sure. And this is
Now
by
we have it.
no
We were a
means-
little behind though over here in Xcode, where if I have to make a small UI change, I have to recompile
Yes.
the whole thing.
Yeah, and that's what's so cool about this is we're kind of going to almost React Native style, but this is just React. This is just native.
Yep.
So other really cool things about Swift as we kind of build this out. One thing that might have gotten missed by Apple when they announced this is that with the new SwiftUI, they also released some new things to Swift, which actually allow you to compile SwiftUI or any other Swift to other languages. So that's the way this works, is that it transforms the SwiftUI into actual
You know what I was
CA
going to
layers
say?
and stuff.
It looks a little bit similar to Xamarin. Like
Yep.
when I used to write Xamarin, just like the way that you're structuring, like how you're creating like a view, a content view, looks
Yep.
very familiar to like Xamarin Forms.
Yep, so what we're going to do is now we're going to create a VStack. So a VStack is a vertical stack, and what we're going to do is we're going to paste in 2 text fields here so we can kind of view what they look like. And then, so now with the vertical stack, you can see that they line themselves right next to each other and on top of each other, and then it will be able to be configured that way. So what we're going to do is we're going to name this one the name of talk.
So that's a text field or a UI label? Or is it just like named something
it's actually
different?
neither.
What is it?
It's it's actually something being rendered by CA layer. For those that aren't familiar with iOS, the CA layer is pretty much the drawing framework.
Yep.
So it's actually just drawing the paths of our letters. So it's actually a raw render view in a sense.
This is interesting. So this is at the CA layer level?
Yep. So if you were to inspect it, all you'd see is a UI view with one massive CA layer that's rendering all this in real time in a sense.
What if you need to manipulate the view though, so that you have to go into the layer and remove things?
Yeah, so say for example, I want to remove this, I can remove it this way. Or what this supports is you can have if statements in here. So say for example, you have speaker bio for some people and don't have it for others. What you can do is literally you can just say if speaker bio, obviously this won't work, but equals false, then I would just show the speaker. But then if it isn't, then I can just do another VStack or an HStack, how about that? And then I can actually show in the HStack the text of the speaker and the text of the bio. And obviously it won't compile because of the fact that I have nothing referencing the speaker bio. But what this does is it enables you to literally write dynamic content. And what it does is when it loops through it, it will say, does it have a speaker bio? Yes, it does. Then it will automatically draw it. Otherwise, it won't draw it because you don't have it. So we're going to kind of go back a little bit. We're going to undo all that code right there. We're going to go back to our 2 stack here. And we're going to draw, now that we have a VStack, that's kind of what our view for all intents and purposes of our, think about it as a table view cell.
Okay.
What we're going to do next is we're just going to wrap this in a list view. So we're going to grab
So
this.
by list view, you're creating like a table view.
Yep. And as soon as I wrap around a list, you see on the right-hand side, it populates all of a sudden as if it was a table. So now we have a name of a talk and we have a speaker.
Wow.
And I know Nicki, you've played with UI table views before. And
Well,
boilercode
I
for
spend
that.
a lot of time coding
Yes.
on the weekends. I build a lot of iOS apps for friends and others.
Yes.
I've been building them for years. That's really freaking cool. You just did.
So basically UI table view with just a few lines of code.
All right.
and
So
then-
more questions. Usually if you want to get rid of the extra lines,
Yep.
you have to insert a blank view as a footer.
Yep.
How would you do that here?
Yeah, so there's all sorts of different ways to do it. So there's basically on the one itself, but there's all sorts of different navigation bar titles and everything else like that. You can configure all your lists by just doing a dot next to it in a sense. So what we have for one of them is we have a group view in a sense. So that's what we're going to transform it to later. I'm just going to pull that code from our code repository. This is the README, by the way, if anyone hasn't looked at it yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull that piece of code so I can show you what it kind of looks like. So yeah, so we have a list style right here. So what you can do is you can just copy this list style and then you paste it in here. What happens is that it'll update over here as a different type of list style view. It doesn't show up right now, but what it will look like when you have more objects in there, so we just paste a few more in there. It looks a little bit different. It's kind of hard to show in this one, actually. So it's easier to show with double sections, I guess. So
So obviously, when you write certain table view controllers,
Yeah.
you have like sections, and then you also have like static cells.
Yeah.
So these are like static cells, right?
Yeah,
Because they're not
exactly.
actually. But is one of them going to become the prototype for?
Yep, that's exactly what we're going to go to next. So we're going to remove all that code I wrote right there. So we're just going to leave in a section with the VStack entitled name of talk and our speaker itself. So now that we have that, what we're going to do is we're going to need to fill it with content. So we're just going to grab that content right there, and then we're going to say, what is that content sense? What is it going to be from? And we're going to say, well, we need a talk store. Well, we have no talk store. So first we're going to have to do is we're going to create an environment variable. Environment object. And this is going to be, we're going to call it talk store. And we're going to call this talk store. So what we did was we created this, remember we created that talk store beforehand. And it's not recommended the fact that I created the talk store though. And you spill it? You did. Oh, weird. Either way, so we're going to create our talk store. Alright, now it just worked. Include type of object. Lowercase? I don't think so.
You created a bar.
Yeah, I created a bar. I'm just gonna grab that.
Clean. Try cleaning.
Clean.
Hey, I use Xcode and Swift all the time, so I know this BS happens to me frequently. I usually just clean.
Yep. Alright, cool. We're just gonna go back into, where's that at? Yes, there's our sample data. There it is. Yeah, so our environment object, and that's what we pasted in there. Oh, so that's what we pasted in there, and I think that's correct. I think for a reason it's just not liking it. We're just going to try and resume anyways and just build it anyways. Oh,
yeah.
You know what was probably the issue? It's because I didn't fill this list in. That's the issue.
What list?
The list below it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, Swift has a nice way of giving you non-correct, nondescript errors.
Yeah.
The number of times you see an error and you just Google it and then somebody else has defined it for you in Stack Overflow.
Yep.
100 times a day.
Yep. So for whatever reason, it's still not liking my talk store, which we have defined up here. Am I misspelling talk store? I don't think I am. That's really weird. Yeah.
Do you have to declare whether it's an optional or?
Nope, that's what the environment object gives you, is that it gives you that definition of what it is already in a sense.
Got it.
Just going to try and move that one real quick. See what happens. Alright, we're going to try and move forward without
Clean.
dealing with it. And
Did you clean and build and it still didn't work?
Clean build folder. We'll try and clean it.
Oh, come on. Just clean helps so many things.
We'll just try it. We'll go for it. We'll try this again as well. We'll build both at the same time. Alright. Well, that's loading. Hopefully, nope, build still failed.
Jeez. What is the nondescript error that it's just not, it says
the
doesn't.
type's not available. Yeah, it's available. I'm going to try one other thing.
You don't have to import it, right?
I don't think so. Because Swift has everything is available for everything.
Ben R783 wants to say, cool talk, Sam. Oh, Alejandro's Twitch has a suggestion. For environment, you need to pass them through scene delegate.
Yeah, so we were going to do that next, but all right, we're just going to go do what Alejandro recommends because we were getting right there anyway. So what we have to do is we have to configure both our scene delegate as well as we have to configure our sample data for our Swift on the right-hand side because we want to still be able to develop that right-hand side and make it look really cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that content view and we're just going to add some sample data to it in a sense. Sample data just is list talk items that we have defined. So like say for example SwiftUI and Amplify, WWDC recap and bash party and so on and so forth. Yes, I know what's going on there. It didn't import my, we're just gonna have to re-import those real quick. Add files to Twitch conference. So so it did not import our API files. So we have to just import those again real quick, and boom.
Because we changed the name?
We changed the name, yeah.
Well, typically it should be set up so that anytime we make changes in the Amplify CLI, that the API.swift file and the configuration file should be auto-populated
Yeah.
with those changes.
Sometimes things just don't work out.
What is TalkStore calling?
TalkStore is calling that, yes.
So maybe that's actually the problem.
Is that was the issue, yeah. So hopefully now that those are done, we can now run that and have no issues. This time with argument type ID name. Yes, so my talk data had some different things. So we had our name, we had a abstract instead of a description, we had a speaker.
Because I changed that, sorry.
No worries.
Turn you off.
Threw me off. It's keeping me on my toes. Boom, there we go. We should be good there. Name, description, place abstract, fix. Perfect. Hopefully that fixes all. Fix. Perfect.
God, why do they have the worst errors ever?
It's just Apple for you.
It's funny because I just spend so much time on this too. So
Place abstract.
Alejandro's Twitch says, I mean, you need to declare and initialize the environment var on the scene delegate Swift and then pass them when calling to the content view.
Yep. So he is right. Yeah. So if we go to the scene delegate here, we're going to have to add something onto our content view in a sense. So what we have to add on is what Alejandro is talking about, which is if you notice in our thing here, was we have to add an environment object. So the environment object we're trying to add here is example one, but one that we want to add to our actual app is not going to be the sample one. We're going to want to use the live production one. So if we go over here and we go to the end of content view and just type it in dot environment variable, just going to go ahead and paste that in. Instead of having talk to sample data, we're just going to remove that. We're just going to use our normal init. So that's just our normal talk-store init that we created earlier. That's actually going to configure and then get that list in that sense. So once that's done, we should have everything rocking and rolling. So it still does not like talk-store. Interesting. Let me try to open it up. See if that works. Anyways, so back over here, let's see what we're having. Let me show you
Why did you make it final also?
why did I make it what final?
The class TalkStore.
Why did I make it final? That is a great question. That is because that is what Apple recommends.
Oh, okay.
For our bindable objects, they want it to be final as it should not be included. And the reason why I was having the error is because AWS AppSync was not imported into our TalkStore. That was the error, and that's why it's
The most
available.
undescript error ever.
Yep. So now what you'll see is we have launch as well as on the right hand side, you're able to say try again, and we're going to be able to view our content view in a sense. Once that loads up.
So now you're actually running in the simulator.
Yes. Well, actually, I ran one of the simulators. You'll see the name of talk, it's the speaker. And then on our right hand side, we're going to see it update in a few seconds. So now that we have our talk store available, we now can actually pull the data from that talk store. So what we're first going to do is we're going to do our content in a sense. And then we're going to go ahead and do that, and we're going to do a binding of talkstore dot list of talks, and then we want the key here is we have to use the identified by. So what identified by is for is that this actually says that we are identifying this the list of talks in that array. There's an array of dictionaries. Well, inside that array of dictionaries, one has to be unique to be able to use it, SwiftUI.
So it's identifying by the ID.
Yes.
This is similar to like when you use a mapper in React Native, and you have to have one key that is the unique value.
Yep. Yeah.
When you're iterating over it.
Yeah. So I'm just going to copy that from our list over here.
Why do you use the slash?
Why do you use the slash? That is also great. So the slash, what slash does is it enables you to actually pull from the unique part of the dictionary in a sense. So what you'll see is that that cool. So the slash says that once we're in the actual dictionary, pull from that dictionary that unique value.
Oh,
instead
it's
of trying
like
to
a
dive
dollar
all the way
sign.
in- Yeah, exactly. Instead of trying to dive all the way into it, we're just gonna say, since you already have what it is, we're just gonna dive
So do
into
they
it.
update that, like from dollar sign to?
No.
You know, like usually if you like call like dot filter or like dot anything where you're iterating over it, you put the brackets and then you put like $0 dot and then you call into it.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So Swift, that's still available in Swift as well. The difference of this though is that it enables you to kind of break out of that for each in a sense. So this is available for those for each loops in a sense.
Got
It
it.
allows you to kind of, in that for each loop, say that I want this single section of that for each, and so you don't have to define that talk variable in a sense.
Okay.
So what you'll see is that we'll have a talk in, and then what we have is you'll see a section and a VStack, and now we have a variable called talk that we can now reference all across our thing. We have an extra one of these guys, looks like, so we need to get rid of him. Perfect. So the easy way to do this is just using our notation from just normal Swift. Talk dot, and then say for example our name and talk dot our let's say our apps or our speaker.
If it's a string, you still.
You still have to wrap it around in that sort of style, I guess is the way to put it.
Okay.
All right. Stop clicking that. That's fine.
Yeah, that was weird. Still yelling at you about the bracket. Something is.
Oh, nice.
Oh. Was that the simulator?
Yeah, simulator dying. So, there we go. Now you can see on the right-hand side that we have SwiftUI, Amplify, Sam Patzer, WWDC Recap, Tim Apple, and Batch Party Beezer. What's really cool about this is, look at that. That's right from our sample data right below. So this is, you're able to kind of view your what it looks like without actually even having to communicate with AppSync.
That's great.
So what's even cooler though is when I hit run, it'll open up and then it'll load, and then you'll notice that our table's empty. Well, why is our table empty? That's because of the fact that we have no data in our GraphQL endpoint. So we have to
So it's
add
only
data.
showing sample data in this little preview view on the
Yep.
side.
Yep. So it's not production in a sense. So it allows your UI designers to build what they want to without touching the back end. It's the same kind of concept that what Amplify introduces in a sense, that you want to build as much as possible for the back end users, and let the back end users manage that, while the front end users can manipulate what they want.
Well, yeah. Well, there's also just two parts to building an app, which is that some part of you're spending a lot of time on the UI and getting it right, and then you're also spending a lot of time on the functionality of it. So it's kind of separating the two.
Exactly, yeah. So
It's like separation of concern for debugging.
Exactly, yeah. So what's really cool about this is, say for example, I can add alignment guide. I can say I want to align this to a like the left-hand side or the right-hand side just by like literally specifying it. I can add to the text. I can say that I want this to be a subheader. I want this to be a title, and you can add all that right in here.
Oh, so you can horizontally align this now.
Yeah,
so like
I can horizontally align
And
it.
you
or
can nest
anything
them
else.
all together. And
Yeah, exactly. And then I can add this as an H stack as well. So, say for example, I can want my speaker bio next to my speaker name. So, just paste that in there, and then we're just going to leave it not tab because it looks better. And then what we do is we have our text, and then our talk, and then we have our talk.speaker bio. And what you see is that when we close this up, and then we save it, and we resume this on the right-hand side. This valid string.
oh, speaker bio is optional.
do you have to?
Yes,
Do you have
yes.
to? Yeah.
Yep.
Do you
and
have
we
to?
have to provide a value, default value. So we're just gonna say it's no string at all if we have no value. Perfect. Good call.
Mm-hmm.
So we build succeeded. So what happens is if there's no speaker bio, there's nothing. So let's add a speaker bio to Tim Apple, owner of Apple. And what you see on the right hand side is that right next to the Tim Apple, we're writing owner of Apple right next to it. So it's automatically updating, and you can kind of see that.
Whoa, that's
WWDC
cool.
Recap is not aligned correctly with Tim Apple and owner of Apple on the left aligned, and so you can add that and kind of see how we can manipulate that.
You can add padding to left and right, center, and all that. So
Yep.
which is nice is as you're making these changes, you're seeing it, so you don't have to go back and rebuild. view it.
For
and then
one
come back and
tiny
make those changes,
space.
right? So the
Yeah.
hot reloading is huge when you're
The
trying to
time
just
spent
make
on moving
each
one thing 3 spaces to the left is absurd. Just because you move it, you compile, and you're like, oh my god, it didn't move. What did I do wrong? Go back, change it again, till you get it to move all the way, and then you've manipulated 10 things, and it's taken you an hour to move one item 5 spaces.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, so you're really saving your time on that. Well, cool. So that's kind of how that SwiftUI kind of manipulates and works with AppSync. So we have, I think, 3 minutes left?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So
We have a little bit of time left.
We have a little bit of time left. We didn't really get around to actually adding any data to our AppSync client. But what I can do is I can quickly add that in real quick, and then kind of show you guys what it kind of look like if we were to have it in a sense. And then, let's see, where is that at? Add talk view. So we're going to have to add our talk view here. So we're just going to go into our README once again.
I'm going to find out if we have a couple extra minutes here.
Yeah, no worries. That'd be great. So we're going to go.
You know what? You have plenty of time.
I have plenty of time. Perfect.
Continue.
So what I just did there is I pasted in a huge section for our add talk section. What it was is that it's a navigation view with a form with our talk name, our talk description, our speaker name, our speaker bio, and then actually the ability to add a talk in a sense. We're going to have to add our debug once again to it. So we're just going to do the same thing right here. We're going to add our debug here. So what you see is that you have an add debug, and then we have to now initialize. And remember, we changed the speaker bio from our description to abstract. We just have to change that over, and there we go. Hopefully that likes it. It might not. And now we have our kind of our view looking what it looks like. Hopefully, if it decides to load, that'd be nice. Maybe I missed a bracket. That probably is what it is. Let's try it. Real quick. Still succeeded. Perfect. So yeah, we're going to see if we can add a add view in a sense. So what we added here was just a view itself that's going to be showing our navigation bar with our list style. For adding talks, we're going to have a trailing action, so our bar. And what we're going to do is we're going to throw an error. If they don't provide a talk or a name, then we don't save, is what we're saying. And then if we do, then we'll go ahead and save it, and we'll actually write it to our GraphQL endpoint. And then we'll actually call the self text called save. So once that's all done, we're going to go ahead and we need to create an environment variable now. So to actually be able to write this out. So what I was talking about earlier is we have our talk store again. What we're going to have to add to our talk store is the ability to create a mutation for AppSync. While I write this, do you want to explain what a mutation is?
So it's basically a post. It's allow you to make that change and send a change to the database through an API call, and then it also query back what you expect. So you can say, I want to make this change and add a speaker and a bio, and then in return, I want to get back that speaker ID or speaker bio ID.
You can be very specific though, so you don't have to return back the whole object. You return pieces back of the object,
Yeah.
and that's the beauty of GraphQL.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. So what we have here is that the function add. So what I did was just what it does is it takes in an input of create talk input, and then what it does is it literally maps it and writes it to our conversation in a sense. And if we're working in that debug mode, what we did is we created a fake add in a sense. So what it does is it literally just appends it to our fake data set that we created earlier, so that way people can press the button and see it automatically happen without any issues at all. So we're going to go ahead and do next is we're going to have to change our description to abstract, as we are working with the abstract now, and we have to create that abstract just to make sure that we're using our commonology here. And then we're going to do the same thing down here, which we're going to change that from description to abstract, and then we're rocking or rolling. One thing you'll notice is that, so we'll have our needed conversion. What happens here is we have a map add. What we're doing is our list, remember when we created our list, we're turning back a query data type, and we're mapping that to a create talk mutation. So we have to map them so that way when you click the add button, it's optimistic UI, so that way when you add it to it, then it automatically adds it to the table, and then it updates the endpoint. And then what happens after that is then it will then go back and then update list view one more time. So that way it's verifying that everything's been added, and so it kind of has way to go like optimistic UI in a sense.
Yeah, and that's great, because when you're saving that information, you don't want it to be like holding up the UI. You want to save it locally and then automatically just sync with the backend and then pull in and update your cache. So you have that option with AppSync, and all that's done behind the scenes, so that you could save 3 or 4 BIOS if you needed to, and then you're offline, you come online, it automatically sync with the cloud.
Exactly, yeah. Perfect. So yeah, so I'm just switching up some things here. Abstract just needs to be placed at the end, just because of the order I put things in. So once that's all set and done, fix one more time. And now we have our map working and all of our add function pretty much set up in a sense. What we're doing here is we're literally just, remember when our fake init, we set AppSync to nil, that's how we know we're in debug mode. It's because of the fact that AppSync is nil. Remember that app will crash in production if AppSync is nil, so we never have to worry about the customer ever seeing this. Because AppSync is nil, then it will crash that app delegate, and then the app will never open, and so they never have to even, like, debug never will show.
But it should never be no.
It should never be nil, exactly, except for when we're running our debug mode, which is that right-hand side preview in a sense.
Got it.
So put in comments, this should never happen, this should never happen.
Yeah, usually what you want to do
I've done that before, it doesn't actually work.
Yeah, you want to use like print with a warning,
Yeah.
or an error. So that way when someone has a crash and you have that error kind of showing up in
You have the logs.
You have logs saying that this should never happen, and then put like why this should never happen, and that way you always are able to know why is it happening in the first place, because AppSync was nil, well this should never happen. And then you say that this is where it is nil.
Got it.
Alright, so we are off on the races. So what we have is our add talk view. In our add talk view, we are literally creating a talk from scratch in a sense. But to create the talk itself, we have to initialize it with a brand new talk in a sense. This new talk will literally have to contain a name, an abstract, a speaker name, a speaker bio. Is it showing? Is it not showing? And all this information from our actual...
To see the preview?
To see the preview itself, yeah. So what we're going to do is, you'll notice that we're having a binding. So what this binding does is it says that we have a talk that we're passed in a sense. So some other entity owns it, and all we're doing is we're giving it. We're being given it in a sense.
Got it.
That we can manipulate it and then we can work with it, but we're being given it, so we don't have to initialize it in a sense. And then the same thing with is showing. It's a state of creation, and someone else owns it, but we are just being able to manipulate it. The reason why we want to be able to manipulate the talk and the is showing is talk is going to be passed around a lot for the ability to eventually edit, as well as to be able to add, and then also be able to create that mutation to be able to add that talk in the first place. And then the environmental object, that's our talk store. As long as you define it as an environmental object, it'll automatically be passed down to the parent in a sense, from that parent. So you'll have to configure that in a sense.
Cool.
Yeah, so what we have here is we have our navigation view with our form. So what a form is it creates that form view. It takes a lot of the heavy lifting
So
off.
this is like a navigation controller?
Yep, very similar to a navigation controller. And you actually even notice that right here we have a navigation bar title and a navigation bar item, which is very similar if you were familiar with navigation controllers, is you create those.
God, they're such a nightmare.
And what you see is we have add a button action where we have the button action will either succeed or will not succeed, and then it has a label of save.
Are you delineating which side of the nav bar the button is going to be on?
That is a great question. Yes, I am. Right here on the navigation bar items, it says trailing. So I literally have trailing. And
So it's the right?
Yep. So on the left-hand side, I don't have anything defined, but you might want to have cancel there,
Or
you might wanna
back.
have something else back or something. Once we get this running, and I can show you something new with new iOS 13, is that there's a new concept of swipe down to dismiss.
Cool.
So I'm just using that as my dismiss function. So they can either hit save or they can swipe down to dismiss in a sense.
So if you have a custom navigation bar, there's another like dot navigation bar. Like you can put in like colors or layers.
Yep, yeah, so you can customize it as much as or little as you want. So for example, the text has all the available things you can do with text. So you can change the foreground color, you can change the size of it, you can manipulate it as much or little as you want. Once again, it's all that view-based rendering in a sense.
Got it.
And if you don't add anything besides the text, what it does is it literally just assumes it from the style that you provide or the default style. We have the list style as grouped, so we're just going to go ahead and assume that we're wanting that.
Text is kind of like a label.
Exactly, yeah. So now that we have our add talk view pretty much all defined, we now have to actually have our content view show a title, first of all, a navigation view, and also be able to navigate to that view. So once again, we're just going to add a navigation view over it, first of all, over this list. So what we just do is we literally just cut it and paste it right in there, and boom, we have a navigation available for our list view in a sense. Just going to indent this all in one. So we are all good. Boom. There we go.
So when you add that wrapper, does it automatically put a navigation bar in the view?
Yep, yeah, so it'll ask me to resume it here. Actually, indented it one too far.
And it auto pauses when you start editing the code?
Yep, so it will pause it sometimes and sometimes not pause it. The difference between if it should pause or not pause is 100% off of what changes you made. So usually when you wrap all your items in another view is when it will have to redo things. But when you're adding under a subview, then you do not need to usually recompile in a sense.
Got it. Okay, so there's the nav bar.
Yep, so you'll notice the nav bar is over there. So
But it's not
there's no title.
extending out to the edges.
There's nothing else like that. Well, that's, yeah. There's all sorts of different things. So you'll notice that there's supposed to be a title up here, first of all. You should probably have a button up here. The formats doesn't look that great. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take our add talk view, because we already kind of defined some of this. We're just going to go ahead and steal those two. So we're just going to copy and paste those in here, right under list in a sense. And we're just going to paste those in there. And now you can see that we have a group and we have a title in a sense. So we're just going to say list of talks. And boom, we have a list of talks, and we're able to then start working with that, and then we now have a title. Finally, last step is we want to add that button again. So we want to actually draw a button in a sense. So we go back over, we're going to steal that navigation bar trailing in a sense. We're going to steal that, and we're going to copy that over here. We're actually going to write our button now. So our button, we don't need our whole self-talk and everything else like that. We just want an action, and then we want a text. Or if we don't want a text, let's say we want to go with image instead. Because with iOS, you now have this really cool thing of image with a name, a system name, and they included all these new images. I don't know if you've seen those, the new symbols.
Yep. I don't know if they resolved the resolution on those, but they're coming out grainy, but I think they resolved that in the latest beta build.
Yeah. So now, when that loads, hopefully, we'll have a button with a image. It loads. Seems to not like my label all of a sudden. Interesting. So we're going to add another navigation button. This time the old style. Our items trailing. That's exactly right. Okay. They might have added button. They might have changed the way buttons work. So we're just going to do a button from scratch here. We're going to do an action here. So we're going to do an action of blank, and then a label of blank. A code of, we're just going to keep text right now. We're just going to call it add, because for whatever reason, that doesn't like having. So now, hopefully, we'll add just some code of, for example, just a print code, for example, hello. So it says that initializer requires that the text conforms to a view. So that's my mistake. So we have to wrap this in a view in a sense.
The navigation bar item entirely, or?
No, the label itself.
Oh, the label.
Okay, you remember correctly. Maybe not. Maybe not like that either.
How did it work on the other page?
I see what I did wrong. I have 2 instead of 1 bracket.
I see that, yeah. Have you ever noticed when you click enter on using their
autofill in?
yeah, it automatically adds 2 brackets every single time?
It's the worst.
It's like the worst Xcode bug there is, because then it creates those kind of errors where you're like,
Yeah.
what's going on?
So now we have our add button here, and now we just have to navigate to our add view. So now we have to actually show our add view so we actually can get started with that. So there's a difference between iOS 13 beta 3 and 13 beta 4. Beta 3, it's a presentation, is to stop presentation and then presents. Beta 4 is actually something totally different, which is called a presentation link that actually presents things. So I'm just going to copy the code for beta 3, but I'll send out the code later on for presentation 4 in a sense. So
Did they say when they were gonna let it go GA?
Yeah, so GA is going out in September when they release iOS 13 to the public in a sense. So I kind of added a few more things here, as you noticed. There's a little bit of difference between the 2 of them here. What I did here was I actually added the ability to disable the button, so that way if we were to dismiss it, we want to be able to not have that button available in a sense.
Like if it was permissions,
Yeah, exactly.
admin versus user.
Admin versus user. Other thing is, say for example, this one say should create as if it's showing. Sometimes what happens is some users are really quick when they double click the add button, or they double click it by accident. You want 2 views popping over each other. And so what happens as soon as that thing's happening, you don't show, disables that button. And as soon as they dismiss it, automatically makes that button re-available in a sense.
Got it.
Yeah. So now
Okay, so then you're showing a modal, which is that other view that we made.
Yep, exactly, of that other view. What you'll notice is that it's asking for some new variables here. And at the very, very top, we don't have these variables available in our content view yet. Well, you have to add them in to be able to work. And so as I was kind of showing you that that binding we had earlier on, well, now we actually have to create those and initialize them in a sense. So those are what are called states. So these are states of view in a sense, or like states of our app in a sense. So our first state we're going to create is our new talk. So we're going to create a new talk, and then this is going to be our create talk input, and then we're just going to initialize this with some blank data in a sense. So we can steal our data from our create data and our add talk view, for example, because I already kind of had that all done in a sense. So we have that right there. We're just going to go ahead and steal that, and we're going to drag it back over here, and we're going to rock and roll with that. So create talk input, and we're just going to paste that in there. And what we're going to have is we have our name, our abstract, our speaker name, our speaker bio, all blank. Because these are all brand new and just working together. It's going to give us an error. Yes. And then we have to do a input and then equals. There we go. And then finally, the other state we have to create is the view. So what this view is telling us is what are we showing the module? Are we not showing the module? Should we save it? Are we in a state of save? And what state are we in? So you can see our state of creation at the very top is save, dismiss, hide, and show. So save is it's currently saving. You can kind of manipulate this. So this is kind of how, say for example, you add that to the very top. You also can highlight it, that row, for example, that says that this is the brand new row. So it kind of enables you to kind of show what you want in a sense. So we're going to steal the same variable name. So it should create. This is our variable name for this one. Should create. And then this one is our num that we have here, state of creation. And since we are literally loading into the app, let's just say that this is hide. We're just going to leave it at that. And then there we go. So now we have our create talk input. We should be able to rock and roll. not linked to our ad talk view. It's always something with these views, I'll tell you what. So what's going on with our talk view right now, except for probably the fact that it doesn't like the fact that we have description there. That's probably the issue. Build still failed. Ad talk. Still thinks we should be. Interesting. That's what we want, right? Yeah, that's what we want. That's the mistake I made. Cool. So ID, we're just going to remove the ID altogether because we don't want to define the ID for it at all. And then we're going to create a name for it, which is going to be blank, speaker name, blank, speaker bio, blank, and abstract blank. We can create those as optionals, but it's just better for later on. We're just going to use them as that such, so we're just going to use them that way. All right, so hopefully it now likes my create talk. It's not still. So add talk view is not working like content view was earlier. So we're just going to write this from scratch, I guess. So
Wait, so add talk, but then is that what you called the variable?
yeah, so add talk is the view itself. So this is the add talk view. Navigation view.
Oh, and you call it like as if you're instantiating a class, but then you're inputting this.
Yep. So for whatever reason, navigation view is not liking it today. Talk name. Abstract, speaker name, and speaker bio. Cool.
It's just not liking that binding for some reason.
Yeah, it's just not liking the module that we created earlier.
Is that just a part of like beta issues?
It could be a beta issue.
Like I feel like we can attribute a lot of this to.
Always blame on the beta.
I mean, we are playing with the beta, so
Yeah.
Might be because of the fact
we
that-
shouldn't expect.
And you're on beta 3, right?
Yeah, so I'm on beta 3 right
weeks
now.
ago.
So from a few weeks ago. So things could be broken still, which is weird because I literally had this working the other day. Either way,
That's
so
pretty usual.
yeah.
That's how my life goes. Like, oh, this was working an hour ago, and then it's no longer working.
Yeah, so since that's not setting not to work, we're just going to do something a little bit different. We're not going to show that view. Instead, we're just going to add something else. So that way we can get analytics in here as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to instead say disabled. We're not going to ignore that. And we're just going to copy and paste some other code I already kind of have available. So we're just going to say add talkstore.add. We're going to do a create talk input. And then we're just going to create some sample talks here. So we're just going to ignore our GraphQL input for our ID because we don't care about that. And then we're just going to do a name. So our new name, we're just going to say hello world. Speaker name is going to be Tim Apple. Speaker bio, none. And abstract, we're just going to leave as an empty string. And what happens now is when we run this, hopefully, it's perfect. Run. Oh, we're missing one extra. There we go. Now when we run this, you'll see build succeeds, and then when you click add, we are having an issue with DynamoDB. That's fun. So it looks like we have an error saving conference talk.
Always the empty string.
Yeah. Containing empty string. Oh, there it is.
Well, you didn't send ID in. Is that auto-generated
That's
somewhere?
auto-generated by GraphQL, yes. So this is an empty string issue. So there we go. So now you can see that as we click add, we are automatically adding the talks, and they're automatically adding right to there. So that way we at least have some data to work with. So that's kind of showing you what the power of SwiftUI and the talk store. I'm kind of bummed I wasn't able to actually do the present of add talk itself, but it's still kind of showing you kind of the power of it.
Basically, the difference would have just been like it shows us a form and we fill it out and then we save it.
Exactly, yeah.
And it would have looked similar, even if you had real data in there and add, you would see it all update really fast, and then if you had it set up with a client to save locally and then upload to the.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what's nice about that reactive.
Yeah. And what's really cool about this as well is that at the very, very bottom here, I can click this little run button, and then as I click add here, once it's actually preview is done running, I actually can run the add button actually from this preview itself as well. So
really?
Yeah.
So then it is like the simulator.
So I can just add as you see fit there.
So wait, do it again.
So once it'll show up on the screen in a few seconds here actually, and then.
Oh yeah, that's so cool.
So then it's adding just as if it was writing to the back end, but you're not writing this to the back end. So it's totally separated from the back end.
Got
So
it.
that's why we created that.
It's the separation of concern for like the functional part of
Yeah.
Swift and versus like the actual front end of it.
Yeah,
like
exactly. So that's why we created this. If nil, then work with it. So yeah, that's kind of SwiftUI working with AppSync, and I'll kind of hand it over to Dennis here, and he'll talk a little bit about analytics real quick, and then hopefully we'll finish out our stream.
Okay, we just got a few minutes, so we want to add analytics because it's so important for a new app, and to add analytics so simple, and to do it.
And you can't go back if you did it without.
You never want to go back to an app and then try to collect analytics, because you want to just first start collecting analytics, and if you're not ready for it, at least you're collecting the general demographics like the OS, the iPhone type, the iPad, what region, whatever it is, the default location is to start collecting that right away, and then you can add custom data into that. And then we'll talk about what that is for Amplify categories. Remember, we talked about the different categories. It's just simply analytics, and behind the scenes, it's going to activate Amazon Pinpoint and then configure that configuration file, allow us to launch it, and make those changes automatically.
Awesome.
So we'll run through, we'll switch real quick, and I'll slide this over on the run through. So now we're back in the same application here in the Twitch conference app, and inside here we can do an Amplify, add analytics. Remember, these are just the Amplify. You got to spell it correct. It always works. Analytics. Remember, it was like auth, analytics, whatever it is, API.
Yep.
We did earlier. So Amplify, add analytics. It's going to ask you a few questions here. And again, it could be a new app, could be an existing app, and then you just want to add these features in there. I'm going to just go with the default. And then this question, it says apps need authorization to send analytics events. So this is where it's saying you haven't set up auth technically because we use an API key for the API. So we're saying, yes, we want to allow unauthenticated users of this app to send analytic events.
Totally.
So does that make sense? Because we always want to secure the apps as much as we can, but we want to let anybody who hasn't authenticated to be able to send analytic events, because we want to capture those analytics before they even log in, possibly. Yep. So we're going to say yes. So behind the scenes, this is going to create a Cognito identity pool and allow, create a role so that any of those users assuming this role will be able to make these calls. Okay, so now once that's done, now we have that added, we're going to do Amplify push, and that's simply setting up that template and going to go into CloudFormation and add that new app ID to Amazon Pinpoint. Say yes, and then we're done. So then now the next step, we have this app, but we need to update the pod files. So we'll wait for that, or I can switch over. I think it should be just a few minutes. Should I switch over? Do you have a different tab here?
To what? Oh, you want to
do the pod files, yeah.
So it's right there, yeah.
Okay, so if we go here. So here we have the same file. So now we're in our application, LS, and then I'm going to open up the pod file. Let's see if it opens up. It should open up. And it's sort of tiny there. And then this one we're going to, so we already have it in there. So the AWS Pinpoint and mobile client. This is the one that handles all the authentication, even though we're unauthenticated. And the Pinpoint will be the Pinpoint client.
You might want to just Command plus on that.
If you guys want to see that. So these are the two here. So this is going to build out the pod files in the SDK. So we'll quit that out. So I just close that out. Okay. And then what we're going to do, we already did a pod install earlier. So we're going to go ahead and run this through. And again, we're going to open up the Xcode workspace. Let's make sure this is done, what that's running. And again, should update the configuration file when it's ready to go. And then it doesn't mess with the API.swift file because we didn't do anything with the changes. So it should be just adding those, the endpoints to the configuration
Go back and
file.
check on it one more time.
And then we'll check on it here. And then once that's running
So
there.
a couple minutes.
And I could just go ahead and open up. See interface.
Yeah, so it's already open.
Oh, it's already open. Okay. So and then here, once it's ready, we should see the endpoint in here, and we should see it populate. See the pinpoint analytics and the pinpoint targeting default. Because there's two parts to pinpoint. There's the collecting of analytics, and then the targeting part is where you collect analytics, and then you can target or interact with your audience if you've collected email
Is that
address
all you
or
need to
push.
do?
That's it.
Wow, that was so
created
simple.
the app ID and the region. And then we simply go into app delegate, and we're not going to go into the custom data piece, but by default, if we set up this in 3 parts, we're going to do, and I have some of the shortcuts here, we do pin 1 and tab, so we're going to import the pinpoint and mobile client, because we already got the SDK. And then we're going again, part 2, we're going to instantiate our object here, class object, and we're going to do pin 2, and that's the pinpoint object. And then we're going to initialize pinpoint before the AppSync here. So we'll do pin 3. And these are just straight from the docs that we just pulled in. So it's going to initialize the shared client. So this is, again, a singleton. It's going to set up, initialize the mobile client, and then using the mobile client to authenticate with the pinpoint object. So what this is doing is saying, okay, we're not authenticated. We're going to launch the app, give them an ID, and then that person will be, that app will be able to send those pinpoint
So that's
commands.
the only code you need to actually
Right, and so
initialize
notice
it.
we haven't done anything with the user interface, any of the content views.
No.
Because once we start this app, the SDK already kicks in and will automatically start collecting those default analytics.
So that really
for us.
was just
That's
it.
So
Wow.
those 3 pieces, and then it's super cheap to use the analytics. I think the first 1 million calls is free, and then after that, like 2 million calls is $1. So we always suggest use this and install the analytics and start collecting it. And by starting this up, it'll start collecting session data, where the region they're coming from, the iOS version, the iPhone version or iPad, the app version, all those details that you want to collect and figure out how often those users are actually launching and utilizing it
Awesome.
by default.
That's great.
And then we can go into each view individually and say, is this person added a new talk? And then, add that so that we can figure out how often they're using it and how often they're removing and adding talks from there.
Awesome.
And that's it for analytics.
That was super cool, guys. Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you both for showing a little bit of Amplify and then as well as SwiftUI. I'm totally intrigued, and I will be playing with it all weekend long, per the usual, as I spend my weekends in Swift. Thank you, guys. Tune in for possibly another future episode. If there's something you want to see with Amplify us build, please tweet at me, DM me. I'd love to know and be able to share it with the team. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and we'll see you later.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Pleasure.